examples of how tension is going to rise in superpowers and the growth of the BRICS is in terms of the relationship between China and Africa, because there are an increasing number of economic ties between China and India, to an extent where they are investing massively in Africa in return for raw materials and various other things, and the Chinese will build infrastructure for African countries and generally just sort of help them out there. But there are also tensions in the Middle East as well, and with superpowers and emerging powers and the energy supplies. It all links to the energy unit. So we've got a great example here of a train in Kenya, new infrastructure that has been built by the Chinese in return for whatever it is they want from the Kenyans. Obviously, this can have a whole number of different impacts. Now, this relationship is often called a neo-colonial relationship. An old colonial relationship was when a country just exerted direct control over another country. Neo-colonialism, on the other hand, is sort of new colonialism. So it's not an overt control over another country. It's very subtle, it's very covert. It can be mostly economic aid and loans, cultural influence. So it's not just an army going in and taking over. So its key thing is to know the difference between colonialism and neo-colonialism. And there's some good, succinct definitions of the two there. So we have to ask what type of relationship it is. Is it something that is helpful for Africa, or is China basically just exploiting Africans for their own gain? It's not just China, as I said. India as well has seen a 506% growth in trade with China over recent years. The EU has seen a relatively high increase, as well as the United States as well, but nowhere in relation to China and India. There's a few other bits and pieces there in terms of statistics for the African-Chinese relationship, particularly about perception of China by people in Africa, which generally seems to be relatively positive. So is it a developmental relationship, or is it a neo-colonial relationship? This is the big question. Now, in terms of China's movement as well, not just in Africa, but across the rest of Asia and the rest of the world, we've got this little diagram here which shows the main movements of trade and the main movements of industrial influence throughout the ages. So World War II, US was dominant, EU became more dominant in the end of the 20th century, and then we start the shift in terms of economic and global control back to Asia. And then we've got the One Belt project of China. The One Belt project, sometimes called the New Silk Road, is a strategy of overland, mostly overland trade links between China and the rest of the world. And a lot of people in the West, particularly Europe and America, are worried that China is tightening its grip on trade and tightening its influence around Asia. So it's very interesting and very important to look at this global shift about the rise of China and India and how they are growing and influencing world economics and global industry a lot more. So there's some good links on there and some reading in the book as well to shore up that knowledge. But there's also tensions, of course, in the Middle East, which can have implications for the world's superpowers, particularly in terms of oil. But there's lots of other different things. The history is very complicated: oil and gas, general resources. Religion is obviously a sticking point between the Middle East and various other parts of the world. So there are a lot of implications for these tensions in the Middle East. So if you go to the notes section of this slide, there's a whole number of bits of information, further reading for you there. The textbooks will give you a little bit more background. So when we're talking about superpower tensions, it's very important to include the Middle East in this equation because it has an impact all around the world.